Welcome back to the channel, everybody. In this video, we are going to eradicate thermal bridging. So we have a lot in this video to get through. What you are looking at right there is the Zip R Sheathing. This video is sponsored by Huber Engineered Woods, the makers of Advantech subfloor adhesive, Zip System, and what you see right there, Zip R Sheathing. So let's get into it. Oh, and I have a special guest. So stay tuned for that. We're even going to bust a construction myth at the end of this video. What is Zip R Sheathing? It is 1-inch polyiso foam, so that's foam insulation, bonded to a 7/16 structural OSB panel. What that means for us is that we install one panel and we get our shear values and we get our continuous insulation. Once we tape those seams, we have our air barrier, weather resistive barrier, structural panel, and additional foam insulation for the new code requirements. And we get all of that in one panel, making one trip around the building. This is the easiest way to meet the new code requirements. But we're going to get into all the details in this video.
Into this block.
And we're even going to talk some building science with an architect. He is the second best looking person at the International Builder Show every year, or I should say the first best looking non-framer. So stay tuned for that. Let's get into it. You just tell me when we're hot.
When we're hot.
We're hot.
Feeling hot.
When we're hot. That's yeah. That's Michael Scott. Hot. Okay. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I have a very special guest for this video.
Steve Basic Architect.
Steve Basic Architect. You probably recognize him from the Build Show. So this video, Steve, we're going to get into Zip R6. Washington now requires we use continuous insulation.
Yes.
This house we went with Huber, Zip System, like we always do, but this time R6. 1-inch polyiso, 7/16 panel. Why are they requiring us to do continuous insulation?
So, well, why are they requiring? Because they're up in their game in the game of energy efficiency, right? And so the simplest explanation, which might seem a little long-winded, but when we look at a wall
You're not ever long-winded.
Yeah. But a wall basically has three components to it, right? It has windows and doors, it has an open cavity, and it has stud spacing. The stud spacing, I call that opaque framing. Okay. So if we took this house that we're in and cumulatively categorized those three things, we would probably have something like 18% of the windows. We would probably have maybe about 16% of it would be opaque framing. Now I got to do the math. That's 20, 34. So that's 66% of cavity.
I'm impressed.
Okay. So 66% of cavity. A lot of people, builders, architects, we always talk about the R value of a wall and we say, oh, my wall is R21.
Because that's what the cavity is.
Because that's what the cavity is.
Okay.
But the R21 is the measurement of the thermal resistance through the center of the cavity. If I move over to the center of the stud, well, the thermal resistance for that 16% of the house is probably like 5.5, 5.8, somewhere in there, depending on Doug fir, spruce, whatever framing member. But if we move over further to the window category, we're somewhere between, say, R3 for a double glazed window, upwards of maybe R7, 7.5 for a triple glazed window. But the reality is we tout the wall as an R21 wall, but the reality is 34% of the wall is R5-ish or plus or minus, and it's not nearly that 21. So if I take those and I normalize those three categories across the wall system, then I get an average that probably brings me to about maybe R10 or R11. So you sit there and say, well, I build an R21 wall. No, you don't. You're really building an R11 wall. So how can I up that game? Well, I up that game by putting continuous insulation on the wall. Now, I can't really combat the window performance unless I just simply buy better windows. But that opaque framing now that was, I'm just going to call it R6 for math purposes. If I add a Zip R6 panel to it, now I'm at R12 for that additional 16% of the wall system. My R21 goes up to R27 for the 64% or 66% of the wall system. So over, say, 85% of the wall now has upgraded that R6. So my R11 overall R value probably starts climbing into like an R15-ish range.
And we're minimizing thermal bridging.
And we're minimizing thermal bridging. And the benefit of the Zip system is the fact that you have an integrated weather resistive barrier and air barrier. So the air tightness makes a huge difference. And for me personally, I would consider that almost equal to the R value. But R value is one of those things that a lot of people like to talk about because it's something that's easily understood, and the industry's been throwing it around for years.
All right, let's go over some very basic layout. You can see I'm laying out plates. This is demonstration purposes. BT dubs. We have our wall here that is 64 feet across. We've already attached our soffit. The bottom plate stops at the 5.5. This wall comes all the way to the back, all the way to the front because it's going to be a rake wall, and I like to frame those outside to outside. Zip R6, that's 1-inch polyiso with a 7/16 zip panel. When we use that sheathing, that affects our layout. So typically we would hook layout and we would mark either 15.25, we would mark centers, we'd mark 23.25 if that was 2-foot centers for studs. And then we would do the same thing here, 15.25, X that way. We framed this wall back here to stop right here. So see how the wall stops, the zip panel extends 5.5 inches, just like this does. This would have been the bottom plate for that wall. The zip hangs out to catch this. Now, here's the tricky thing. Instead of hooking the edge of framing, now we really need to hook the outside of our zip panel. Here is the reason why. Because we want this foam to completely overlap. Now, if I was to lay out from here, here's what would happen. If I hooked just like normal, then that means my sheet would stop here. That is no longer continuous insulation. We want our insulation to cover the insulation, and really we want it to go right to the edge of the panel. Since this is 1 7/16 inches, I need to burn 1 7/16 inches, which essentially mimics hooking the outside of this panel. So this is what we want our corner to look like. The foam overlaps the foam. As opposed to this, it goes to that. Now this is what the corner would look like when the walls are all up. We're looking at the foam. Some people will hog this out so that the panel touches the panel. We're going to tape around this corner, and then we have solid backing for nailing base for our trim and our siding. So it's just a way to save a step. In the middle.
At the flinch, that's why.
Yeah, maybe just a hair more. Yeah, like that. And that way the cutting edge, you see that cutting edge almost goes right to the bearing.
Picture this side.
Yeah, I think that's about perfect. Yeah, because if the bearing's not set quite deep enough, I think that's when sometimes it wants to burn up somehow. And now let's talk about layout and Zip R Sheathing. But first, a note from our sponsors. Are you suffering from low T? Sorry, that's like the, okay. So here in front of us is an outside corner. To the right is an inside corner. And look at that, we have some beautiful Zip R sheathing. Now, where we are at here in Washington, we're using the Zip R6 sheathing because it's kind of like the best of both worlds. We get an insulated sheathing, but we can still meet the shear values, generally speaking, that we need to. The R6 is 1-inch polyiso insulation with a 7/16 structural 1 OSB panel bonded to it. So technically, that's 1 7/16 inch thickness. In the real world, where people stop being polite and start being real, I would call that 1.5 inches. Okay, so let's go over layout. We have to know the panel thickness. If you were using the Zip R9 or R12, of course, those are thicker panels. The Zip R, what is that, an R3 is a little bit thinner. And so you have to know the thickness of your panel because instead of starting layout right here, let me get this little arm. Instead of starting layout from the outside corner of your framing, we have to start it from the outside of the adjacent panel. So we're going to burn 1.5 inches. What that means is that you put the 1.5 inch mark on the edge, and that would mimic hooking this if you're going to do all of your layout. And then let's come back over here. Our panel is, of course, 48 inches. So coming from the outside, that would still center us on a stud, which is what we want. And foam covers foam. In fact, let me go from the top down. Now we have the foam on this panel starts right at the corner, but this one, the one that I would call north-south, then it starts from the outside of the panel. And of course, you could have reversed those. So just keep that in mind when it comes to your layout. On an inside corner, things change as well. Notice that we have to know which wall is going to be sheathed first and which wall is second so that we have enough backing in the corner. So as an example, if I just delete these, you notice, in fact, let me delete one more. Typically, we would run a stud on, let me just loop around. So normally we would have this stud on the end, and we have one flat, and what this does is allows them to get insulation right into this cavity. The same thing on an outside corner. And as you notice, that provides enough backing if we were to be using just regular 7/16 sheathing, because that's going to be 1.5 inches, right? It's offset the way that that other stud was. When it comes to the Zip R, we have to add this stud in, and I'll show you why. Let's flip around the backside. We have a 2x6 wall, so there's one stud on the end, plus 5.5 is 7. A 2x6 wall plus the Zip R, well, that's also 7 inches. Notice this right here. I'll try to get a rough measurement. So that's about 7 inches, right? Hey, there's that 1/16 of an inch. So that just means that all we have to do is stud, flat stud, just like normal, but we add one more on. And let me get those panels back. Let's go back to this guy. And so now you can see why it is that we need to know which wall is sheathed first, because it just affects backing. So at all inside corners, you just need to have one additional stud. And you can see that from the back side. That way this stud provides nailing, because this panel is not just providing insulation, right? This is also our shear wall. And so we need solid backing for that. So just remember, if you go back to the beginning, you want to burn that 1.5 inches. Let me go one more. Now, if you didn't burn the 1.5 inches and you measured from here, then what that means is this first panel would be not half a panel. So we'd have a bigger piece here, a shorter piece here, and the shorter piece is going to be hard to use up. So just make sure that you hook the outside of the panel moving that way. So whichever wall you started on, if it's an outside and the next wall butts it, just make sure that whatever the thickness of the panel is, that you burn that or you hang that past the framing, and then you lay out your studs. Clear as mud? All right, let's get back to the video. And if you're anything like me, save your work. I don't like having to redo. I actually had to redo this drawing. I did it a couple years ago, but I can't find it on one of my 9 hard drives. And if you go down and hook, so I have 63 foot, 8 7/8. 63, 8 7/8. 63 foot, 8 3/4. Honestly, I don't even think it's worth doing, but we'll do it. You know, for the sake of the camera. Give it one more good whap. Yeah, I think that's fine. So that's a, you know, if you had a 1/4 inch difference, you only need to split that so it's an 1/8. So when we're an 1/8 difference, I mean a 1/16. This, I believe I said, was a 66-foot wall. I can't remember now. We find it so much more efficient to do as much to the wall before we lift it as we can. That includes nailing the Zip R sheathing. Now, did you notice that my panel edges are 4x material? We build in seismic design category D2. That just simply means we're more likely to have big earthquakes. Our engineers spec'd 3x studs at the panel edges. Because of that 1-inch foam, we have to use a 3-inch nail, and we have to nail it 3 inches on center. Now he wanted it all the way around all panel edges with 3x. We couldn't get 3x studs. It turns out up here they're just not that common, and therefore they're more expensive. So it's actually less expensive for us to get 4x studs. Okay, so you're probably thinking, well, I thought we were trying to reduce the amount of wood in the wall. We are. But remember, structure and life safety trumps insulation. And that is the beauty of continuous insulation. Like Steve was saying, we can make up for some of that opaque framing with the Zip R6 panel. I think on the next house I could get him to let me do double 2x6 studs. Now, when it comes to nailing, like I mentioned, we're using a 3-inch by 0.131 inch nail. Notice that I already have those coils staged. All panel edges, including the bottom plate and the top plate and boundary nailing, which is the edge of that window right there on the left, that all has to be 3 inches on center. I buy nails from Nail Gun Depot. I'm going to put a coupon code in the description below. Because if you buy more than $1,000, you save shipping. So we found that we saved $1,600 per house when we buy from Nail Gun Depot. We should have been doing that a long time ago. We've been doing that for about a year. We bought specialty nails from those guys forever. But it's just, hey, you live and learn. It's all about progress, right? All right, everybody, let me catch you up on this. So we've got 9-foot walls upstairs, 104 and 5/8, so 109 and an 1/8 total height. These are 4x10 sheets. They hang above the plate. I'll show you that in a second. They also hang below the bottom plate by, I don't know, like 3.5 inches. The reason for that is there's no cutting of these panels. It'll catch the rim by 3.5, and then 8 foot down will catch all the way to the bottom of the mud sill. So no cutting of these sheets, no cutting of these sheets, so no waste. Thank you, Timmy from Pound for Pound. We're getting the LP 16-inch soffit installed now. We'll straighten it, brace it, and that's going to help keep the wall straight. This 4x10 sheet hangs above the bottom, or above the top plates, about 7.5 inches. That's essentially what our tail detail will look like when it's all said and done. What I did is we went ahead and laid out for all of our rafters, snapped the line to where I knew that the tail needed to be to give us some room, and I just ran through and drilled holes with the Forstner bit. We found a 2-inch in the van. So just drill the holes, and then I just came through, zip, zip. That piece came out, no pun intended. I mean, unconsciously intended. And then there's the tail. So what's gonna happen is, that's gonna be out of a 24-foot rafter, which is those guys. This guy's gonna come up. We'll have 64 feet of soffit, and then eventually rafters that die just behind this. I always leave about 1/4, and then we'll fasten through there. The rafters will hold up the soffit, bippity boppity, with no ladder work. Have I told you all how much I love you lately? I do. Now, maybe you read up on building science and you've seen some marketing that says that the foam is on the wrong side of the panel. Does that actually matter? Well, let's bust that myth. Okay, so we're on the subject of wetting and drying. Washington State, now we have to use continuous insulation. So that wall is Zip R6, 1-inch polyiso, 7/16 panel. Now how do I let the thing dry?
Myth number 3.
Back in our last myth, when you look at a wall assembly, you need to understand what's the most restrictive member. Without the Zip R6, without the polyiso panel in there, the OSB was the most restrictive panel. I add polyiso to the mix, now it becomes the most restrictive panel. And so the result there is we need drying potential in both directions because we really can't dry through it that easy, right? So we need to make sure there's no restriction towards the inside of the foam panel, and we need to make sure there's no restriction to the outside of the foam panel. And as long as we can confidently say that there isn't, then we're okay.
Okay.
Mother Nature has a handful of simple rules. But what it really boils down to is looking at the wall assembly and section, finding out what's the most restrictive layer, and ensuring that I can dry in both directions from that most restrictive layer.
So it gets wet as I'm building, like this wall is wet, but I can dry to both sides right now.
Yes. And understand that as it's drying, those components are getting more vapor open too, right? So the polyiso is the most restrictive, and if I'm drying to the outside, the OSB is 2 to 3 perms, but then the weather resistive barrier is 16 perms, 12 to 16 perms. So as that moisture is migrating out, it gets the ability to speed up. Takes us back to your traffic comment, right? The lanes just keep opening up wider and wider, and we get to dry.
Busted.
I guess the next problem that I should be concerned about as I'm building an assembly with that product, does it matter where I put the foam? Is there only one right way to build that assembly?
Bonus myth.
One of the things that I've learned about building that I think is a true myth buster is that there's not only one way to build a building.
So is there anything wrong with the fact that I have the insulation against the stud and my structural panel and my weather resistive barrier outside of that?
There might be an argument that if you ask me what is the most correct way to build it, then you might say that the zip panel or the OSB panel and the insulation should be on the outside of it. That way there it warms the zip panel, keeps that interior face warm, and so it puts it at a lower risk.
Ask me why it is I prefer that the structural panel be on the outside of the foam.
So against my better judgment, why is it better if the panel's on the outside?
Thank you for asking me that. Because it's a nailing base, right? I can attach my siding to it. I can attach my window to it. I can teach the guys how to flash windows. And it's exactly the same process as if it was just the 7/16 panel. Doesn't really matter. Really, the only thing I have to teach them is longer nailing, longer, maybe the window attaches with a longer fastener, and the engineer might tighten up nailing.
Zip taking it upon themselves to create a panel that the installation never really changes, but the options to improve the thermal performance of the panel has the ability to change without changing the installation method is a huge advantage.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's like in a perfect world, yes, let's put the foam on the outside, but we've already achieved our goal with it as it is. Anything beyond that is, then we have to just balance really what's the cost benefit.
Right.
And this is going to be our lowest installed cost. I mean,
Yes.
that's what we figured out for us.
Exactly.
Thank you for asking me. I was just really wanting to interject.
I'm trying.
You're doing pretty
No,
good.
I'm trying to get back to Vegas, so I'm trying to like wrap this up so we can get
Back to Vegas. Let's go.
Are you ready?
I just love working with Steve. Okay, a couple of other things you need to know about Zip R. You can see it right here on this rake wall. How am I nailing through a 2x6 plate, through an 1.5" plate, and actually hitting the framing below? I have to use what I call a jumbo nailer. That was a Bostitch. This is a max high pressure. Both of them shoot up to 5-inch nails. I think I was shooting 5, maybe 4.5. It doesn't really matter. But in order for me to get that 2x backing on top into solid material, I need a longer nail. I think I was shooting a 5-inch nail. So the Bostitch is a lot cheaper than the Max. The Max is a lot lighter. I preferred the Max. The guys preferred the Bostitch. You say tomato, I say tomato. Let's just call the whole thing off. I prefer the Max because we run Max high pressure. They're a lot lighter due to the fact that you have to have special compressors. And basically the way that works is the extra pressure means that we can have a smaller piston. So there's soffit framing for the porch framing. I can nail through that and hit solid backing because I'm using that 5-inch nail. Here I have a combination of tools, right? Because I needed the long nail to fasten that ledger, but the rest of this framing can just be standard. And so that's why I'm using the Passload XP nailer. I am not standing on rails. These are not the droids that you're looking for. So just, if you're the safety police, just remember, no one called you. And what about deck ledgers? I'm sure you had that question. I had that question. These are the 8-inch Strong-Tie SDWS timber screw that is specifically designed for ledgers. Additionally, I have PWT treated LVL ledgers and joists. So I asked our engineer, hey, again, we're using the Zip R sheathing. Can you send me a revised detail on how many fasteners and what length? And I can't remember off the top of my head, but just like the nails, they end up just being on a closer spacing and a longer screw. And so this is the Makita XGT. It's really the quickest way to drive it. Just don't blow those heads right through the LVL. And since we are talking about details, by the way, you notice some of these nails look overdriven. What happens, and there's an APA tech note on this, what happens is once they get rained on, the panels pucker a little bit. That is normal. It happens to all plywood and OSB panels. Okay, so let's talk about taping. This is an outside corner. You notice that I have the foam facing the camera. What that means is if I use the 3 3/4 inch seam tape, it just means I have to do 2 layers. So this layer, I go right flush with that right-hand side of the panel. And this wouldn't be an Awesome Framers video if you did not hear the following expression. Always, always, always roll the tape. The acrylic adhesive needs to fill the little rough spots on the panel. This was all designed to work together. Steve's explained that in some other videos. I like to roll as I go. You could tape both sides and then roll. You notice we've got a fiberglass painter's pole. That's what we put our rollers on because it just gives us a little extra height. You notice that when we roll it, it picks up the texture of the panel underneath. That is what we want to see. Then we're doing it right. Now, what about the other side of the panel? Well, remember we need a minimum 1-inch overlap. And so what I like to do is just use the 1.5" panel itself and just use that as my straight edge. So I'm up the ladder again. By the way, I'm not sponsored by Little Giant. But these Little Giant ladders that flip and become quote-unquote extension ladders are absolutely fantastic for this and for siding because we're allowed to lean the ladder and then we can flip the little extra legs out and get some extra height. It's a lighter solution, and it really does about, I don't know, hard for me to tell on that house. It's all one story, so it did 100% of the work. But I'd say you can get up to about 10 feet comfortably and safely. So there's a pro tip for you. So notice how I've just used that edge as the straight edge. I'm going to roll it. Then I'm going to get to the other side and peel it around the corner. The other option would be to use the 6-inch tape. The 6-inch tape, of course, has the release liner, and that may or may not be an issue for you. It does create a little bit more trash, but you can be one and done in the process. So we typically just use seam tape and save the 6-inch tape for windows. Remember, as framers or siders, our goal is to be as efficient as we can, so do whatever you can off of that ladder as you go. It's just, what would we say? It's like a foundational principle of framing. And you notice there on the bottom left, you can see the shininess of those nail heads. Those are not overdriven. Whoever nailed that did a nice job. I can't remember at this point. That was a little bit ago. I mean, look how much younger I looked. That was the original Awesome Framers hat. By the way, if you do want an Awesome Framers hat, I'll put a link in the description. I don't make any money off of them, but TrueWork was willing to do the fulfillment. And so I said, hey, let's put the logo on the hat. And they said, sounds good. Also, I pretty much only wear TrueWork clothes. So again, roll the tape. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. The system is designed to work as a system. Think of it as like irreducible complexity. If you take one component out, like our eye, then it does not function properly. When it comes to inside corners, Kyle was really good at taping the full height. Timmy, not so much. So I cut, as you can see there, about 3-foot pieces. I want my inside corners to look good. Again, when people look at this stuff from the street and they see that things are nice and straight, it's even on both sides of the corner. That's a little quick flash tool. We bought a few of those or got them at International Builder Show. They're great for this inside corner stuff. But when it looks good from the street, you know what people unconsciously or subconsciously think? That's right. They think that everything else must have done well. So if you're a really bad framer, but you want to fool everybody, just make sure your tape is straight. And there is a free pro tip for you. If you want, hit the super thanks below and subscribe to the channel. You get lots of tips like that here. Anyway, you notice how nice and straight that looks, and it's just much easier to work in 3-foot pieces. So there it is. Oh, and always, always, always roll the tape. Roll the tape. And this was our 3¼ horsepower, I think, Makita router. Since then, we got that Metabo, which is just fantastic.
All right, so we're over in the corner here. One of the questions that comes up, we're using Zip R9 panel here. I got my very lovely assistant working here. But notice one of the questions, I should say, about Zip R Sheathing is, while we have a really good weather resistive barrier here, we have a very vulnerable edge in the polyiso. And the question there is, well, how do we deal with that?
So from the bottom side, this whole thing would be exposed.
Right.
What do you do about that?
Right. And I don't know about you guys, but in New England here, we do double sills on all of our foundations. Yeah,
we're single. Yeah.
I mean, some guys will use single that are trying to do whatever, but it's kind of like that guy's the hack if you use a single.
Well, wait a second.
Welcome to the West Coast.
East Coast versus West Coast, I see.
So, yeah, well, that's just what we believe here, but
That we're hacks.
No. But I think, you know, the beauty of having the double sill now is that we could take the lower one, use it as a treated sill, and we could simply extend it out to whatever depth our sheathing is.
Which is about a little under 2.
It's a little under 2. These are 1 15/16. It'd be 1 7/16 for the R6 panel and 2 7/16 for the R12 panel. But having that double sill allows us to extend out, provide protection under there, but also gives us a sill to nail to. So we don't really give up any of our shear nailing or have to do anything crazy there, because it's basically, this is the additive
Yeah, because for
piece.
load path, the structural panel has to be attached to the mud sill. Mud sill is attached to the concrete.
Yes.
So you guys, 2x8, you guys are snapping lines 5.5, letting it hang out?
And just letting it hang out that 1 15. And then we hold the 2x6 face is basically flush with the concrete.
And it's all smooth on the inside.
And it's all
Yeah.
smooth on the inside. It's, yeah, I mean, it's within 1/16 or
Yeah.
so there. But now you can see we have a nice, you know, hard bottom here where rodents and such can't go up, and we carry that detail vertically when we do a step foundation. And then obviously this will get all covered, nailed off, and covered with the Fentrum tape.
So this is the Sega Fentrum tape, and you can see right now it hasn't been installed on this side yet.
No, that's perfect though, because we can see it in profile.
You can see it, and you don't have to prime it. So we're primarily a spec builder. Anytime we can save some time, it equates to a labor money savings, honestly.
Right. And that, you know, guys here favor it. You know, I've heard different stories. You can see we have a much wider one and a narrower one. And, you know, this is one of those things people say, well, what should I do? And it's like, it depends on who you are. Because I know some builders that would say, hey, I just want to go around once. And then I've heard builders say, man, that is a pain in the neck folding it. So some guys will just fold this up and come over to the edge, and then they'll just come over the top of that with a second piece and make it real easy. And for those of you that are new to using Zip R sheathing, I hear it all the time, and I'm sure you do. Well, you don't have any shear value there. No, we do. Even the Zip R9 panel has documented shear values. Now, they're slightly decreased from just using the standard 7/16, but they are there. This whole house has been fully engineered by our structural engineer, and he provides us the details with the lesser values.
So this R9 and smaller is great because we don't have to use any special nail guns. Right. This is a 3.5-inch nail that attaches?
Yes.
Yeah, and we're just minimum 3-inch. Our engineer just has us put more nails.
Yeah, and they have a spec. I mean, it's the .131
Yep.
nail, 3.5 inches. So we have that whole spec. We have a little shear schedule that, he puts out for us to nail that off.
What we like to do is take that last rip. I like to cut it with the track saw, keep it nice and straight. It goes from the block line down to the mud sill. We go ahead and just tape that edge of the foam in the zip panel. Just wrap it in a U shape, roll the tape. We just use the seam tape for that. Another option would be to use metal. So there's a variety of options. We don't have a whole lot of bugs or vermin here. That works well for us, especially considering that our siding is going to overhang that by about 1.5 inches. Okay, now what about windows and doors? You notice there around the opening, man, we got so wet this winter. Anyway, around the opening you can see, in this case with the Zip R6, the 7/16 panel, the 1-inch polyiso. So how does that affect the way that we set windows? Well, you notice that I'm flashing with 6-inch tape for the sill, and then I'm going to use the stretch tape. And that's going to fully cover the edge of the foam and, of course, the zip panel. And just because it's so much fun to watch it, let's just stretch some more tape. And don't forget, you always, always, always have to roll the tape. I should really make that into a t-shirt, except nobody would get it. Okay, let's show you 2 different options for setting windows. These are Inotech windows out of British Columbia. They are a European-style triple pane window. They are insanely heavy, very energy efficient. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier in the video is that with the Zip R6, it is noticeably quieter in the house. And then with a triple pane window, it's even quieter still. I mean, it was pretty amazing. You didn't hear the water dripping. Anyway, this isn't about that. The way that these windows are installed, they have those tabs. They're rated for high winds, seismic, etc. So what I'm doing is I'm screwing that to the inside of the frame. Now those tabs are long enough that it's not an issue with the Zip R6. You can see it there. But if you were using the R9 or R12, then you may want to buck out your window. And what that means is you would just frame your window 1.5 inches bigger all the way around, and then you would frame that out of wood that extends from the inside framing all the way to the outside of the jamb. Now if you're installing windows similar to what we have here, where they're just screwed or fastened through the nailing fin or nailing flange, I've been corrected on the terminology both ways on YouTube. Just use a longer fastener. That's all you have to do. These are some strong tie wafer head fasteners. Just get them another inch longer. And that is all there is to it. It's super easy.
So, thank you very much, Steve, for coming out. And you flew all the way out here for like a 2-minute. So, thank you very much, Steve, for coming out. And you flew all the way out here for like a 2-minute.
I flew all the way out here to do that. But that's the kind of guy I am. For the industry, there is no bounds to what I'll do.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's test that in the next YouTube video. Okay. Awesome. Thanks.
No problem.
Yeah. I'll just voice over and do a bunch of other stuff. But now we have like a.
Does that sound good?
We have a professional. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. People will watch it because I'll just put you in the actually, should get somebody to take our picture, and that'll be on the thumbnail. Who's volunteering?
Director of photography here.
Yeah, that works out. I didn't have to pull out my own camera gear.